The U.S. plans to withdraw all its troops from Afghanistan by September the 11th. But some American officials have criticized the decision. So could it accelerate the Afghan peace process or plunge the country into further conflict? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Foliba Thibault. It's been the United States' longest-running war, but it's now set to end. President Joe Biden plans to withdraw all U.S. troops from Afghanistan by September the 11th this year. That's exactly 20 years after the invasion was ordered by George W. Bush following the attacks on New York City and the Pentagon. The planned withdrawal will miss a May 1st deadline for a pullout that the Trump administration agreed with the Taliban last year. The U.S. has some 2,500 soldiers in Afghanistan as part of a NATO mission. It spent trillions of dollars on the conflict and lost more than 2,000 service members since 2001. Washington says it will reposition its troops in the region to keep an eye on Afghanistan. But some U.S. officials have criticized the decision. They say it's a grave mistake that could embolden the Taliban and lead to more violence. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell said foreign terrorists will not leave the U.S. alone simply because our politicians have grown tired of taking the fight to them. The president, he says, needs to explain to the American people how abandoning our partners and retreating in the face of the Taliban will make America safer. Now, the head of Afghanistan's Reconciliation Committee, Abdullah, has warned the Taliban against imposing conditions after the U.S. withdrawal.
The people of Afghanistan want their rights and freedoms protected, and they don't want the restriction of Afghanistan. And this is the decision of the Afghan people. And we should find a way out and how to take people out of this destruction.
Well, the Taliban appears to have hardened its stance towards a delayed U.S. withdrawal of troops after May the 1st. The spokesman for the Taliban office in Qatar, Mohammed Naeem, tweeted on Tuesday, "Until all foreign forces completely withdraw from our homeland, we will not participate in any conference that shall make decisions about Afghanistan." Well, let's take a closer look at where the Afghan peace process has got to. A 10-day peace summit is due to be held in Turkey next week in an effort to end the war and hammer out a political settlement. It comes after the Afghan government and Taliban agreed to accelerate negotiations in Russia last month. Direct talks between the two sides began in Doha last year, but didn't achieve a breakthrough. The group agreed to stop attacks on international forces following an agreement with the U.S. last year, but it's threatened to resume hostilities against any foreign troops in the country after May the 1st. Let's bring in our guests now. In Kabul, we have Fahim Sadat, who's a political analyst and head of the International Relations Department at Cardan University. In Washington, D.C., David DeRoche is a former Pentagon official and associate professor at the National Defense University. And also in Kabul, Victoria Fontan, professor of peace studies at the American University of Afghanistan. Welcome to you all. Welcome to Inside Story. David DeRoche in Washington, D.C., let me start with you because this is where this decision has come from. President Biden rejecting the Pentagon's push to remain until Afghan forces are able to assert themselves against the Taliban. Why has he done this? And in your view, is this a good or a bad decision?
Well, I think it's a bad decision, and I think that that's shared across the board. The Washington Post, which has been fairly pro-Biden, has said it's a disastrous decision. So I don't think this is just a military view. I think that's shared across the board. Why has he done it? Well, he's done it because, quite frankly, Americans are weary of the war. And the idea is that if the Afghan government would have developed the capability to stand on its own 2 feet, it's had enough time to do it. I served in the Army in Afghanistan when my son was 6 months old in 2002. He has a beard now, and that is a pretty common tale. People are just tired. What we've seen are a lot of houses bought in Dubai. We haven't seen elementary progress made towards a functioning government. It does remain an open question, though, as to whether this is a sincere order or whether he's trying to put pressure on the Afghani government to give more in negotiations, take negotiations more seriously.
But do you
That's
think
the only caveat I have.
Do you think it gives the U.S. any leverage at all?
No. No, I think it deprives us of leverage. I mean, what it does, it's a huge morale boost for the Taliban. I mean, you know, the Afghan government is a very, very fragile concept outside of the suburbs of Kabul. And what you have are a lot of individuals and tribal groups and other sorts of groups that are saying, okay, who are we going to support? And what the Taliban is saying is the Afghan government is about to melt away. You know, historically, people don't win wars in Afghanistan by conquering their foes. They win it because military forces change sides. And what you've seen here is a huge boost for the Taliban, telling people that have the ability to choose the government or the Taliban, it's time to change sides. So I think this is not the last word on this subject, and I think we'll see a lot of flux in the coming months.
Fahim Sadat, do you agree with that? David says this is going to be a huge boost for the Taliban. Is it? And where does it leave the Afghan government?
Yes, absolutely. This would be a boost to the Taliban. It's very simple that the wars does not end when you simply want to disengage. I think the lacking air support and as well as logistical support to the Afghan government to hold the Taliban at bay would be very difficult, especially when the foreign troops are not in Afghanistan, because we Afghans and the government also see the existence of the foreign troops as a deterrence, and that guarantees that the Kabul government will not fall at any situation until they are here. But in the absence of foreign troops and in the absence of air support and as well as logistical support, there is the feasibility of Afghan government to collapse given the surge in the attacks from the Taliban once the troops withdraw. So I think the Taliban are also looking at this as an opportunity once their calculation is as such that once the foreign troops leave Afghanistan, it will be easy for them to take over on Kabul, which definitely ends for them in the as an advantage.
Victoria Fontan, your thoughts. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has hinted that other NATO countries might follow suit and also withdraw their troops from Afghanistan. Is now the time really to close the book on the Afghan conflict?
Well, definitely for some nations, they think that they are going to be closing the book. But for Afghans, the conflict will continue. And in no means this withdrawal is actually going to be the end of the war. And I think that this is something that really ought to be taken into account, and that, you know, foreign governments have to be clear on their intention. They want to leave, but the war will continue. Now, the Blinken letter that was sent to President Ghani back in February left an opening for other countries to actually stay and for a more regional force to be established in order to help Afghanistan stabilize and help the government of Afghanistan in its pursuit of security while it would negotiate with the Taliban. Unfortunately, now it doesn't look like it's going to be the case anymore. But as David said earlier, maybe this is a way to put pressure on the Afghan government to actually get its act together and start creating the conditions to negotiate. This would be the only way forward, in my view, because it is indeed a terrible decision.
You say it's time for the Afghan government to get its act together and meet the conditions that it's agreed to. But is it solely the Afghan government that is to blame for the stalling of the peace process?
Well, no, of course, the American government has been emboldening the Taliban, both the Trump administration and now the Biden administration, with its unconditional announce of a withdrawal. At least the Trump administration had put conditions forward. So it's definitely not just the Afghan government's fault. But, you know, the Ghani administration has been too busy fighting with other political factions to cling on to power instead of actually creating an Afghan state force ready to negotiate with the Taliban.
Right.
And now we see the price that is about to be paid.
David, let me come back to you because, you know, of what you said earlier, that this was a bad decision. But what would a small remaining contingent of American troops be able to accomplish really in Afghanistan? You know, just over 2,000 servicemen remain in Afghanistan. What role And what have they been able to accomplish? And what would leaving them there actually achieve?
Well, it depends on how you tailor the force, but I imagine what you would have would be a cadre of trainers and people that would run certain high-end military functions that the Afghans just are not ready to take on in spite of years of investment. So that's things like aerial medevac, supervision of logistics, running logistical systems, repairs and maintenance of high-end equipment. And then the second thing was that there would probably be a very small, very limited targeted counterterrorism capability that if there were any sort of hint that we had, an attack brewing against the United States or against our interests overseas or our allies or partners from Afghan territory, they would go in and
But they've said
they
would keep some troops in the region, though, to keep an eye on Afghanistan.
Well, that was the Trump plan, but the Biden plan seems to be absolute. And, the problem is you can't keep troops in an area in the absence of a cooperative, friendly government. So, this would assume that the Afghan government is able to, maintain its control. And what we've seen is, failure after failure, right. Whether it's tribalism or corruption.
Let me ask Fahim about that. Fahim, the Afghan government has until now relied on U.S. airstrikes to help hold the insurgents back, but it's lost a lot of territory to the Taliban. Is it ready to be on its own?
The Afghan government wouldn't have an option but to fight. I think one of the basic things after the withdrawal would be for Kabul, in order to hold back the Taliban at bay. We will really have to see if the government has that capability. But looking at the current battlefield situation where the Taliban are in an advantage and have an upper hand, in a situation where the foreign troops are already here, although the foreign troops has very much advising role, but their air support is vital in any government operation that is happening at the moment, and still they are losing territories. We don't see the Afghan government being in an advantage absence the foreign air support and as well as logistical support. So I think the situation will deteriorate and there will be quick advantages and battlefield gains to the Taliban after the U.S. withdrawal and lack of air support to the Afghan government in the military operations.
Victoria, are you as pessimistic as Fahim, who says the security situation will likely deteriorate? We've seen attacks by the Taliban. We've seen also attacks by other groups. ISIL, a number of bold and brazen attacks by ISIL in the last year, in the last 2 years. What will a departure of foreign troops, of the U.S. contingent, even if, as Fahim said, they've been mostly in an advisory role, what will that mean for the security of Afghanistan? And what about these other groups that have also been fighting for control and fighting to gain some sort of recognition in Afghanistan?
Well, I think that this is a really important question because we see the amount of attacks that have taken place by other groups in the last 15 months, that this amount of attacks has been increasing, that the amount of casualties has always been very high. And so it clearly shows that the Taliban have no capacity to actually prevent such attacks from occurring. And so, I guess that what's also clear is that the Taliban are winning militarily, even now with U.S. air support. So what will it mean when there's actually no air support? The Afghan army, the Afghan defense forces have actually no means to sustain the hold that they have on certain areas outside of the big cities. And so the future is bleak. There will be no support from other foreign contingents. Other groups will be emboldened in the same way that the Taliban is being emboldened now. And it's very clear that the Taliban have no way to pacify the country as they promised the U.S. they would do. And again, the Taliban is not just one group. There's many different groups within the Taliban. And then what happens when they start fighting one another?
Indeed. There are divisions even within the Taliban movement. David, I want to ask you about these other groups that the U.S. has promised to prevent, Al-Qaeda or ISIL and other groups from establishing a larger presence in Afghanistan. How are they going to be able to do that now?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, honestly, if you don't have a physical presence there and the means to enforce an agreement with violence in the ultimate, analysis, then you're dependent on the word of the people that you're leaving there. So it would be either, some sort of agreement between the Afghan government, the legitimate Afghan government, and the Taliban. But as Victoria pointed out, there's really two. There's more than two, but a simplistic analysis is there's two Afghan government or two Afghanistans. There's Kabul, and then there's the provinces. And in the provinces, anybody who has a grievance against the central government calls themselves Taliban. That gives them instant status.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that they can, it works in the negative. They can be used as a force of violence, but they can't be used that effectively to impose government decisions, whether it's from the Afghan government or Taliban leadership. So it's going to be very, very hard. And I think what will happen is when bad things happen, the Taliban will just say, oh, that's an outlaw rogue group, nothing to do with us. We'll do our best to put it down.
Right.
But the bottom line, we're going to have to take their word for it. And I'm not comfortable with that.
Your thoughts about this, Fahim? The Taliban has been trying to gain international legitimacy. So some would say it is in their best interest to negotiate an agreement and a deal now with the Afghan government. Do you think there is appetite for that within the movement? And how worried are Afghans about the prospects for peace? With the Taliban saying that they will not participate in the negotiations in Turkey until all foreign troops leave their country. How worried are people about this?
Well, basically, the Taliban think that the history is on their side at the moment, and they have almost won the war militarily. Some of the hardliners within the Taliban rank and file believe that there should be a military victory, a total military victory, and they do not really like to have a political settlement coming out of the negotiations. But there are some political leaders of the Taliban who are engaged in political settlement and want a political settlement for Afghanistan. This also depends on how is the battlefield commanders and as well as the political leadership unified and how much they have leverage over each other. This we will see later on. But with the Afghan people, I think Afghans are worried because the Afghanistan of 2021 is far different with the Afghanistan of 1996 when the Taliban had their emirate in Afghanistan. And now people are in a way different situation. The Afghan women are concerned for their rights. The civil society and the human rights activists are concerned for the human rights in an Islamic emirate, and as well as the Taliban, and also I think all the Afghans at the moment want an Afghanistan to be part of the international community and be with the rest of the world in context. So these are concerns, particularly the human rights and women rights, and the developing civil society, which we have at the moment in Afghanistan, are the concerns that every Afghan holds now. If there is a total victory of Taliban and Islamic Emirate coming into shape.
Victoria, I want to ask you about the peace talks, the peace negotiations. There's supposed to be a meeting in Turkey next week, which the Taliban has said, for now anyway, that it's not going to attend. There is also the Russia track with Moscow. We saw a few days ago, actually getting the two sides together and the Kremlin also pushing for a ceasefire. Which of these tracks has a better chance at success? I mean, the Russians getting involved. Of course, there were the talks in Doha that were, achieved a few things, but have been extremely slow. The negotiations have stalled. Where can there be a movement, you think, in these negotiations, and what needs to happen?
Well, it depends what the end game is, because the Taliban know that they are winning militarily. They know that they don't need to negotiate anything for the US to actually withdraw. And they know that they have the capacity to take the country over, basically. So, which peace talks could actually succeed? It depends how you define success. We know that the
succeed in bringing about a unity government.
Again, is there really a need of a unity government when you can govern on your own? And that's really the question to be asked here. Also, some of the parties that were supposed to negotiate in those peace talks are the same parties that actually brought the conflict to place in the first place 40 years ago. Right. All the different warlords, etc. And so, it depends who is going to be at the negotiating table, who is going to be accepting to negotiate. But really, it doesn't look like the inclusion of other parties but warlords and potentially the Taliban would actually yield to any form of progressive Afghan state like we've seen in the past few years. So again, with regards to peace, this particular announcement signifies to many that the peace talks are dead and that they are not likely to restart anytime soon.
David, in Washington, D.C., let me come to you. You talked about your experience. What will be the legacy of America's 20-year conflict in Afghanistan, in your opinion?
Well, we never speak of legacies in what, from an American perspective, are limited wars. I've always had even when I was there, I've always had a view that, when you have a limited war like this, the outside power, in this instance, the United States and NATO, is kind of like a ship, and it moves in and it moves out. There is an educated class of women. I was very proud when I was in Afghanistan. I managed to teach English to some Afghan women in my spare time. So there's an educated class of women that quite, hadn't been able to reach that level, even in the days before the Soviet invasion. Theoretically, if the Taliban is forced to modify itself, there might be, some sort of assertion of that, but that's really not much more than hope. I think the second thing is that there is an effect on Pakistan. Pakistan has historically been the safe haven for the Taliban, but I think particularly after the assassination of Benazir Bhutto and then the massacre at the Army Officer Cadets College in Peshawar, I think Pakistan has a more wary approach. So perhaps the legacy of the war will be a little bit different. But other than that, there's been a lot of buildings built, but I'm afraid that a lot of our effort has just vanished into a maw of corruption and inefficiency.
Fahim Sadat, I'll give you the last word. As an Afghan, what do you see as the legacy of the American involvement in Afghanistan being?
So far, we have a government, we have a constitution, we have as somehow a democratically elected president. We have an emerging civil society, and we have the concepts such as human rights, women's rights. We have education, where girls are going and getting education. So there is an international recognition. I think these are all the legacies that we have out of these 21 years of U.S. engagement here. But what the people are worried now are that the preservation and the maintenance of these gains of the last years, and it should not go into waste by having a total submission to the Islamic Emirate with their harsh interpretation of Islam and rules. So I think the Afghans want a developed, democratic, and as well as a society where the free will is respected. And as well as women's rights and human rights are protected. Afghans are looking for something like that. We do want the war to end, but at what cost is now the question. At what cost do we want the war to come to an end? Of course, we want the war ends, but the previous gains to be sustained, and as well as a free and elected and a democratic society in the future.
Thank you so much for sharing your views and thoughts with us, Fahim Sadat, David Desroches, and Victoria Fontan. Thank you all for being on this edition of Inside Story. And thank you for watching. You can always watch this program again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Foli Batibo, and the whole team, thank you for watching. Bye for now.